a small technical matter with one of the cameras here. And we're live. Dr. Corsi, lovely to see you again. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Charles.
Great for having us here.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be with you.
Special episode of Charles Ortel is closing in with Dr. Corsi.
It's an honor to be here. This is where the magic happens, and we're here in the writer's den.
This is it.
How many books have you written at this point?
I've written 25 books since 2004.
25 since 2004. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Give or take.
Give or take.
Yeah, I don't keep really a precise count, and I wrote a few before then. So
that's impressive.
You know, this has been a good run, and I'm very pleased. I mean, this Partners in Crime, which Charles, you're featured in very extensively. Your research was critical to this book.
Well, I think we could tell our viewers maybe a little bit of inside baseball here. This all began in 2015, for me anyway, when you graciously allowed me to come visit you in the Harvard Club up there on the second floor.
Right.
And I took you through my findings. You listened patiently, maybe impatiently. Whatever.
Well, I mean, you said, had I ever looked at the Clinton Foundation financials? And I said, no. And you said, well, it's a vast criminal enterprise. And so you immediately caught my attention. And then in that conversation, we went through it, and you began showing me filings and financial statements, and I was pretty shocked.
Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for taking it all in. And you gave me good advice back then, as always, which was, you know, rather than try to keep this stuff to myself and run, you know, the risk of what can happen to enemies of the Clintons, you advised me to share the information widely. You began publishing in WorldNet Daily.
Right. And
that was, if we think about it, you know, that's just when the revelations about the private server were coming to the fore, and before.
I think we were really ahead of the curve at that time. You know, we were really out in front of it. When you brought it to my attention, I mean, clearly we were expecting that Hillary would be the candidate. And so immediately I thought, you know, let's get into this. And then as we did, you're right. I mean, I always like to publish everything as I've got it. I don't like to save it or hold it because, you know, that only gives an incentive. If something happens to you, it doesn't get published. So always I'm publishing constantly. And I've learned over the years, the more you give away, the better it is, including trying to sell a book. Because if people are brought into the story early on and get involved in it, you know, a great deal of information should be free, and then the book pulls it all together. So your blogs, I thought, were very effective in those years and that time, and more detailed. I mean, I'm pretty much of a fast writer. Your writing is more, it's like your analysis. I mean, you know, it is more labored. I mean, it's, you know, it's more of a torture for you to write.
Right.
But it reflects the analysis you do, Charles, because your analysis is so meticulous.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it was a pleasure working with you in that early period, and then the book came out, the Partners in Crime book. It really needs to be read again. You know, I go back over it, jog my memory. There are a lot of great footnotes in there beyond what I provided, and when you look at the enormous pattern and practice of deception, you know, it goes back, you've written about the Clintons for decades. Their business model has two main planks: lying under oath and obstructing justice. That's how they roll. They lie under oath
and attacking their enemies. They're very good at,
right,
you know, making you the bad guy for attacking them. They'll immediately try to discredit you, and that's the third leg of their whole.
But it's always accusing you of doing what they themselves are actually doing.
Typically, yes. Typically, yes. But, you know, for instance, if you write about the foundation, then suddenly you're someone who hates the Clintons, and is not willing to appreciate the good works they're doing, stealing money over all these disasters. I mean,
It takes a certain amount of talent to stand up there and fly around the world platinum class, stealing money from the foundation and from the donors and say you're doing good works. But, recently, in the last 24 hours, they managed to even fool Donald Trump, who's a pretty smart guy. Do you see what happened there?
no, what I haven't followed this one recently.
So yesterday, Donald Trump went up to to New Hampshire to talk about the opioid crisis, and he praised the Clinton Foundation for helping with the opioid crisis when the Clinton Foundation has never been authorized to do that work. And there are questions over whether the approach the Clinton Foundation may be taking even makes sense. There's this drug that it's called Narcan.
Right.
And if you get one of these overdoses, you take the opioid overdoses, you take the Narcan, and it temporarily reverses the effects of the overdose. But some doctors believe that that's actually a dangerous route to take. That what it's a crutch that encourages more opioid use.
Of course.
And so here's Donald Trump at the speech, praising Narcan, and I don't think by name the Clinton Foundation, but immediately the world's expert on diarrhea, Chelsea Clinton, comes forward and thanks Donald Trump, for appreciating the good works of her foundation. It's just.
Well, I mean, the problem with the Clintons is if you read their brochures and their public relations, all their annual reports, and they constantly manage, okay, so there's an earthquake in India, so the Clintons go to India and they get all these photo opportunities,
Right.
and they produce these glossy annual reports and these annual Clinton Global Initiative festivals in New York. And if you believe that, you believe the public relations surface, it sure looks like they're doing a lot of good work. I mean, here they are in country, they're surrounded by all the people who are evidently appreciative of their philanthropy. But until you do what Charles did, which is you go get the financial filings and you realize that they're not listed as a charity in this country, that they haven't registered for this purpose in the United States, there's no IRS determination letter. So, and then the state filings, which are a complete mess all across the country. And then Charles said, okay, let's look at the financials. Financial statements are like a joke. I mean, they're almost worthless because there's these large categories of numbers into which all kinds of things are thrown without any detail in the financial that would permit you to evaluate, what that line item consists of.
Right. And so when I came to you in the very beginning, I said, there's no question that this is a fraud. The interesting questions include how many people knew about this fraud, how many people have been covering up this fraud, why have they been covering up this fraud, and I suggested to you that Lois Lerner was intimately involved. She had to have known. She was in the key position at the IRS from 2001 to 2013. Head of the tax-exempt organization 2006 to 2013, she had to know how many other people knew, how many governors, how many state attorneys general, how many foreign leaders. And that brings us really to the purpose of today's book. A deep state operation here certainly knew about all this. And, the question is, who's actually going to govern this deep state? And you have this great new book. I've been reading it. And,
Thank you. Yeah.
We're really here today to talk primarily about that.
Killing the Deep State.
Thank you very much.
From Newsmax. Here, Doctor, why don't you tell us about, is Donald Trump killing the deep state? It seems like the firing of Andrew McCabe may have been the first real significant salvo in that effort.
Yeah, I think the first impact of killing the deep state is, when I wrote it's shocking to many people that the extent to which in the FBI and the Department of Justice there really was a coup d'etat plan to make sure that Donald Trump did not ever become president. And the information there, as you read it and as you go through it, I mean, it's startling, the number of people in the Department of Justice and the FBI at the very top levels. I mean, we're talking about, Loretta Lynch and all the way through James Comey,
Holder,
their subordinates, all these people McCabe, who we now know, and people whose names we did not know until the investigation, like the Strozik and Page, these two lovers who are exchanging all these messages. I mean, it's almost hard to imagine how they had a love affair. They're exchanging so many instant messages to one another. And what's shocking is that this was part of the normal operation of a politicized Justice Department, that it wasn't considered abnormal. It was considered perfectly, somehow or other, within the scope of what they were legitimately allowed to do, that they could sit around and say, we've got to prevent Donald Trump from being president. And if he does get to be president, we need an insurance policy to make sure we can impeach him. And they go about equally trying to make sure that Hillary is not accused of anything. Hillary is not in any way brought forward with any criminal activity. And as I wrote it, the shocking thing, I think, in the first level of what hits you is the extent of the coup d'etat and how much it was accepted within this bureaucracy, including the CIA, where John Brennan, as head of the CIA, could say that it was Russia who hacked the DNC emails. And then you look and you find out that it was Eric Schmidt, who was the chief outside data officer for the Hillary campaign, and he put $100 million in this firm CrowdStrike that comes in and says, well, the metadata shows Cozy Bear and Fuzzy Bear, so it had to be Russia. Well, then Julian Assange publishes from these CIA crypts how the CIA has the ability, and so do other intelligence-type agencies, to implant this metadata to make it look like it was Russia. Okay, and so Eric Schmidt's funding Hillary. He's managing the data gets stolen, and now they produce this, this Fusion GPS dossier, which Hillary's partly paying for. It's partly being paid for by the DNC. They're paying for it through Perkins Coie, which is the law firm that represented Obama on the birth certificate. This law firm has been around all the time as a Obama-Clinton fixer. So the money goes into Fusion GPS, and now they're trying to sell this dossier, which is a pack of lies. Nobody can validate it. They get it into the FBI. Maybe John McCain even helped them get it into the FBI. And the FBI says, we can't validate any of this. But McCabe and Rosenstein, and by the way, I think this is the basis on which Rosenstein could and should be fired for his approval of the Fusion GPS to go forward to the FISA court. So they bring it forward to the FISA court, and they don't tell the FISA court judges that this is opposition research or that they have not been able to authenticate it. So, the crimes begin, because now you're misrepresenting to a federal judge the contents of what you're presenting as evidence. The judge says, is this the complete document? And they say, oh yes, that's the complete document, all 6 pages of it. And then they find out the document had 9 pages. What happened to the other 3? Oh, we didn't think you needed to see those.
You need to get that.
No, that's all right. This is, we do that.
Well, go ahead.
Doctor, you mentioned John Brennan.
Yes.
And of course, as the station chief in Saudi Arabia, he converted to Wahhabi Islam. Is this not similar to an intelligence agent in the 1940s becoming a Nazi, or in the 1960s becoming a communist? It's sort of shocking, isn't it?
Well, the thing that I think was, what was particularly shocking to me, not that he converted to Islam. I mean, I'm going to assume many, other people do convert to Islam, but that he hid it and that he wouldn't admit to it.
And Wahhabism, the most extreme form.
And so he begins speaking Arabic. He learns how to speak Arabic, and he begins in State Department speeches speaking Arabic. First of all, John Brennan comes on the scene. There's another book I wrote, The Abomination, in which I found out that he was the outside security consultant to Obama that broke in and stole the passport records and sanitized Obama's passport records. And then Brennan shows up We have that book right over here.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pull it out. Pull it out. We have the whole stack of the books here.
Just so that people maybe
we
buy
are.
a few more of your books.
Well, that's The Abomination from 2008. And in it, I show that Brennan was the one who sanitized the records. And when sanitizing the records of the passport, Obama promotes him to become National Security Advisor, and then he gets promoted to being head of the CIA.
For me, that raises a much larger question. I mean, how did somebody like that? I think that people who operate at the highest levels of the Trump administration, now I guess it's Pompeo, whoever replaces Pompeo, need to go back into that history and understand, how Brennan actually got his security clearances, and more than that, how the many people in the Obama administration, Ben Rhodes, for example,
Ben Rhodes.
he flunked. He was denied a security clearance
Right.
in transition. What caused him to be denied in the transition late 2008 to early 2009? Who overrode that decision? And how many other people? There's all this controversy now about Jared Kushner not getting security. How many people in the Obama administration, I would argue illegally, were cleared to see this high-level stuff, including Uma Abedin?
Well, and see, it was a different standard in the Obama administration because the deep state, which has gotten to be this group within the bureaucracy that is entrenched, some of them with this SES, they're able now not to be fired, this special classification of civil service where they can't even be fired, a law that was passed in the Carter era. So now they develop their own ideology, which is hard left. They believe that the United States is outmoded, includes State Department, includes Justice Department, it includes the intelligence agencies. They think that this was, the Constitution really needs to be rewritten, that we
Right.
really should enter a new world order where we have the international trade agreements. We should be part of the United Nations, where the United Nations basically sets the rules, or if it's not the United Nations, it could be an international governance that includes the EU and all these other international groupings which set the rules. Whereas, even the Supreme Court justices that become New World Order, like Ginsburg, begin feeling comfortable to bring in foreign rulings as the basis for their constitutional interpretations. Other nations' jurisprudence to be applied here. Or does the Court of The Hague and all these others that, so this group of internationalists, as it were, and Obama comes on and is their champion. Certainly Bill Clinton and Hillary were, although they weren't as, they were not the Saul Alinsky acolytes that you see in, Obama, who was a Saul Alinsky community organizer. They are all accepted, so whatever they want to do is going to be okay. They get a presumption to pass. So Ben Rhodes, who cares who Ben Rhodes? He doesn't need any degrees. We don't need any
Stinking degrees.
Why we bother with these things? David Axelrod, public relations guy, astroturfing in Chicago. Family, very strange family history, communists, etc. Coming up through Chicago politics, decides that he's going to champion African Americans who want to be governor, or picks Deval, what's his name, from Massachusetts, picks him as his first, and then Barack Obama as his second. Well, of course, David Axelrod can have all the top clearance he wants. What difference does degrees or universities mean? Ben Rhodes, the whole bunch of them. Valerie Jarrett moves in. Well, Valerie Jarrett was born in a Namazi hospital in Shiraz, Iran. She is Iranian, she's Muslim. And the Namazi family, Hassan Namazi, whom I followed in another book, Atomic Iran. We pick up Atomic Iran.
Where's that one?
That's up there too.
How many books have you written, Doctor?
25. I see it.
25, see it? It is up
There
there.
it is. All right.
I'll have to put them all away again after
Atomic Iran.
Atomic Iran. I go through I go through Hassan Namazi in this book. Here we are. That's the topic of Iran. You got a good view of that one?
Let's hold it more towards that camera so people
There
can see.
we are.
Pull it a little closer to you. There
Here
you
we
go,
are.
Doctor. Perfect. Atomic Iran.
Okay, well, I cover Hassan Namazi in this one extensively because Hassan Namazi was one of John Kerry's top fundraisers. And he was promoting that it would be okay if we gave Iran nuclear fuel because they would use it for peaceful purposes, very much like Clinton did with Jimmy Carter on the agreed upon framework in the Clinton administration when they gave nuclear fuel to North Korea on the same premise.
Brilliant.
And suddenly,
What could possibly go
what
wrong?
could possibly go wrong here? So that's Namazi. Then Namazi turns out, and he is a top fundraiser for Hillary in 2008. And then Namazi ends up in federal prison because he cheats some banks. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I'm gonna take care of that, Doctor.
All right, good.
That-
He cheats some banks out of millions of dollars. Now, the Namazi family, just to follow through with the story, the Namazi family is a famous family in Iran because in the 1880s, the Namazis were the principal family producing heroin for the opium trade that was going into China, for which the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank was created.
Yes.
HSBC, for MI6 and the British intelligence counterparts who were running the opium trade to control China in the 1880s, in that period of time. The Namazi family became rich. So here's Valerie Jarrett. She's born in a Namazi hospital in Shiraz. The Namazi family ends up being big funders of Kerry and Hillary, tied into this whole network, and nobody bothers to ask who the Namazis are.
Amazing.
It is.
Absolutely amazing.
It's stunning. I mean, we've just been hearing recently from Harmon Wilford and his wife. I don't know if you've had a chance to see America's First Refugee. Harmon's in New Zealand, and he's describing the intricate interrelationships between all the people that enable this corruption. It becomes a little almost hard to fathom how you will drain the swamp without draining everyone.
Well, and that's another one of the things that's startling about Killing the Deep State. When you read it and I go back and show you the deep connections between Hillary and Obama, how they fit together going back to 2008, the compromises they made, where Hillary was the first one to investigate the birth certificate and may well have said, we'll trade this information as long as we're Secretary of State. And by the way, don't be concerned that we have our own private email server because we may be transacting certain business on the foundation that we don't want anybody to know about. But it's okay, Barack Obama, because we'll give you your own personal anonymous email address that doesn't say Barack Obama, and you can use that when you want to communicate to us through our email server while we're out of the country, which, by the way, is another famous criminal technique that goes back to Machiavelli. Machiavelli said if you want to run a conspiracy, the only way to do it is make everybody part of the conspiracy.
Right.
Then nobody can turn you in. So now Barack Obama has equally compromised himself over the emails that compromise national security, such that if Hillary's prosecuted, he should be prosecuted. And when it comes to Comey making his famous statement, McCabe and Swartzik rewrite it. Instead of saying, the president used a personal anonymous email address that was secret only to him and to Hillary to communicate, he said, a person in the government, high in the government.
Well, it's not
Okay, so
totally inaccurate.
When you look at all these, and then behind the scenes, you've got George Soros in the wings, ready to, fund this whole movement, including Antifa and the hard movement of the Democrats to the left. And what's shocking, I think, in the Killing the Deep State, as people read it, the reactions I'm getting are the deep nature of these connections. So it's a entire, hard left progressive, and I'm basically saying today socialist or communist on the European style government, interconnections that fund an agenda to change the Constitution of the United States fundamentally in what could be a 16-year conspiracy where, Obama rules for 8 years, and then Hillary for 8 years, and in that process, the fundamental transformation of the United States has occurred with the bureaucracy, the CIA, the NSA becoming politicized and weaponized, surveilling everybody in the population, all our emails, all of our conversations, like Snowden and others say. And by the way, here's Google, created by the CIA and Facebook and all the others, which are intelligence fronts posing as social media, where I'll voluntarily tell you everything about everything I like, all my clicks and all the things I like and don't like, all my friends, everybody I communicate. Oh, here's all my pictures.
Messaging,
here's where the pet
everything.
Everything. And you can all use that in a database, free. You don't have to collect it. I'm going to give it to you because this is Facebook.
Yeah.
And what wrong could Facebook do? And that data immediately gets shipped into the campaign of Hillary Clinton or Obama, with Eric Schmidt signing on as chief technology officer, and by the way, fed into the NSA and the CIA, where they're profiling everyone. And then if that doesn't bother you, the Department of Justice and the FBI get politicized so that if you're in with the cabal, nothing you do is going to be criminal. If you oppose the cabal, your income tax forms are going to be searched back to the time you were 12 years old, whatever you first filed one.
Right. To me, that's seriously offensive. If you go back to the Clinton years when Al Gore had invented the internet in theory, but people really weren't using it as much when Bill Clinton was president until broadband came along after that. We didn't have a system where, as our mutual friend Judge Napolitano explains, every keystroke in America vacuum up into NSA. They can look through that stuff. Who knows who's looking at it, whether employees or contractors are looking at that stuff. They want to get you. They'll figure out the crime, from that information, and then they'll manufacture an excuse to go after you. That needs to be regulated. That absolutely needs to be regulated.
And 100%. I mean, I've been following this intelligence source, QAnon, the Q source, which I pretty well identified, as to who it is. And a person is military intelligence trained and close to Trump and legitimate. Now, what the information being telegraphed is that the internet's going to be 100% regulated, and it's going to happen in the FTC, and that's where it belongs, not in the FCC, because it needs to be dealt with under antitrust and stronger privacy concerns and issues of whether markets are being restricted or rigged or whether markets are allowed to be open. These are FTC issues more than FCC, Federal Communications and Federal Trade Commission. And secondly, this Internet Bill of Rights, where we're going to have our fundamental freedoms protected on the Internet, because the power of this, I say it's like Sting song, every move you make, every click you take.
That's good. I like that. We'll have to put that to music, right?
Exactly.
Is immediately shipped right in.
I'll be watching you.
I'll be watching you. Is immediately shipped right in to be part of this database, and with the deep state in control of the database that is not resolved to be democratic, but is intolerant, that is going to be rigid and demanding mind compliance with its dictates and acceptance of its news as it chooses to report it. Neither Orwell or Aldous Huxley, when they wrote their books, 1984 or Brave New World, ever imagined a government with this kind of technological power, combined with, CIA, MK Ultra, and what they learned with the drugs. And so instead of worrying about drugs being used for mind control, for, producing Manchurian candidates, let's just drug the whole population.
Well, they also never anticipated the voluntary release of the information. Orwell never thought everyone would be just telling the government where they're going, what they're doing. Now, Doctor, I think most people watching Crowdsource the Truth know that I've been very skeptical of QAnon. And actually, your adherence to QAnon is the one thing that's kept me looking at it. Wouldn't a person in military intelligence be risking prison to release all this classified information?
None of it's classified. That's the interesting thing of what's being done. The methodology of QAnon is to pose questions, almost cryptically, like you would in an intelligence level. The intelligence training I had, I was never in the military, I never worked for the government, but I had top secret clearances, and I started with the State Department in the 80s, and even before that I was working with the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration and others from universities on the race riots and the other political protests, Vietnam War protests. I've done a lot of that. I've seen a lot of intelligence material over the years. Most raw intelligence is pretty worthless, because it's from the field and people are trying to self-promote, or so there's a higher level of intelligence in which the data is being sorted out, and what you're looking for is, comprehensible patterns on which you can make policy decisions, because you basically want to present a commander or a president with the strategic or tactical situation of an enemy or a terrorist group or whatever, so that the choices in response, or the next actions, can be better informed. High-level intelligence is not always right, but it's always analytically important to know which are the forces. So it has to be put together in a way that the real exercise is drawing the connections and putting things together. And what QAnon has done is, with these kind of cryptic posts, forced people to make the connections to see, in fact, how behind the scenes really works. Okay, so for instance, I'll give you some recent examples. The QAnon started about 2 weeks ago talking about how this whole issue of Google and the censorship, when it became probably a month ago, when Google canceled my YouTube account and InfoWars began to have its account, and I went public very actively, aggressively on Twitter and others, and said basically to Eric Schmidt, you want to duke it out, you want to do it in the alley, or you want to do it in federal district court, or you want to do it, because this isn't going to go, and I know where you came from. Okay, and I also know that when Donald Trump signed an executive order on 12/21 on confiscating the assets through Treasury of anybody involved in human trafficking or corruption, broadly defined, the next day, virtually, you resigned from Alphabet. And actually, I don't think that was coincidental.
We haven't heard very much about that since then.
And he decided he was going to become an MIT professor, I believe.
Really?
Well, what would life be like, Eric Schmidt or Zuckerman? Zuckerberg. If you didn't have billions, but you reduced all this worthless stock. So QAnon's starting to say, watch, these are now going to be leveraged and destroyed because it's going to be 100% regulated and they're going to be exposed. Okay, so then we get into this week and the whole issue of this Cambridge Analytics comes out, which appears to be an attack on Donald Trump, but everybody acknowledges, wait a minute, Facebook and Zuckerberg were 100% in control in the back pocket of Obama and Hillary, and they got all the data. And it was really in 2012, predominantly, when all these Obama gurus producing their micro-targeting were fundamentally mining Facebook and Google and other information to produce their get out the vote. Now, once the American people realize this, and once it's clear that this isn't social media, this is an intelligence agency front, and you just willingly gave up everything about your entire life, what books you like, what movies you want to watch, where you go on vacation, what hotels you like, you know.
Well, it knows where you are at any given moment, the
Sure.
GPS in the phone.
GPS in the phone, and you know, and by the way, here's Facebook, so please post all the pictures of all your friends, all your relatives, all the dogs, all the cats, and wherever you are, take some pictures so your friends can see.
Yeah.
And give us your phone number. While you're at it. You know what we should do? We should do a poster with Facebook, and then instead of a like button, it should be a dislike button.
Exactly.
Okay, so now you go back to QAnon. Okay, and so what QAnon basically said is that these companies, these social media companies, aren't going to be worth a salvage price by the time the public understands what the game is.
That's good.
And, you know, then they're going to be opened up to competition, because with Donald Trump now aware that even Twitter has put his posts as sensitive, so if you don't have your settings to accept sensitive materials, you're not going to read Donald Trump's posts. So the President of the United States is being censored by Twitter,
Yeah, which has
by Jack Dorsey.
And Al-Walid bin Talal, big investor in Twitter.
Right, and you know, now certainly none of that information goes beyond the NSA to be shared with any other intelligence agency in the world, where they're working reciprocal arrangements. So the British can spy on us because we're foreigners and share that information with the Obama White House on the Trump campaign, which I'm sure they did.
I mean, you know history better than I do, but the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia, basically the idea back then, as I understand it, was that individual kings and queens could have a count or an earl set up a private army and then claim with a straight face, you know, I didn't attack you, it was this guy over here and I don't control. I think that this period where civilized nations have countries that have, in effect, private armies in these private contracting firms, that's got to end. You got to stop that.
Well, all these things, and the, you know, when I got into this book, you know, The Killing of the Deep State, and the shocking thing, and people's eyes are opening as they read it, is the extent to which this deep state, this rogue group of hard left, agreeing with Hillary, entrenched bureaucrats, are controlling the State Department, the Justice Department and the FBI, the intelligence agencies, the IRS, with these massive data capabilities that mean that, you know, they know more about you than you know about yourself. Because where you may not remember what you wrote in a letter or a post 10 years ago, the computer system at the NSA has everything you ever did back to grade school archived, with a social profile of you, social psychological profile, based on your likes and dislikes and how you evolved over this time. I mean, this database is so massive that nobody who participates on the grid is going to be beyond scrutiny.
You know, after our last conversation, Doctor, where you described to me how there was fraudulent activity reported on your Gmail account.
Right.
I began thinking about that quite a bit. And I looked up, Barack Obama was the first president to ever tweet. And he really was the first president to ever contend with or potentially utilize cyber warfare. And I wonder, is there any possibility that someone hacked your email and was able to manipulate your information?
Possible. I mean, I think what happened was I began to realize I had created my YouTube by linking it through to my Gmail account. Okay, and so Google now gets involved, and then I'm wondering, you know, so Google Maps and Google Chrome and all of these things connect. So within the Google family, they have all this data about you, which can then be interconnected, so that as soon as they took down my YouTube account, my Gmail reported it was compromised. And, you know, whether it was an intrusion or someone had hacked it, I don't know. But the point was, simply by linking it and taking down the one, they took down all the others.
Right.
So I had to reestablish Gmail, I had to reestablish Chrome, I had to reestablish Maps. I go through this whole process.
It was an attack on your Google account.
It's an attack on your identity, because you see the ability to say, you know, Jason, I don't like you anymore. So, you know, I don't know what it is. It's your glasses. I don't like your glasses.
That clip is going to get reused and sent around the internet so much.
And so therefore, you're disconnected. You're unplugged.
Right.
You know, you don't exist anymore.
Right.
And you can't get on Google, you can't get on any of these things. You're unplugged.
Yeah.
Okay, now that power over people, once we begin living in a universe that is dependent on all this technology, if you're forced off of it because you're a bad dog with the wrong glasses, you know, that your livelihood is affected,
Yeah.
your ability to communicate is affected, you know, the quality of life you're going to live is affected, which is an enormous club to tell people, you know, don't do anything that might offend the Google gods. Now, who are the Google gods? Well, you can't know, because nobody's name, nobody's phone number is posted. They don't want you calling.
Right.
And you get determinations. Well, I appealed. They reject your appeal, of course. You don't know who did that or on what basis they did it. Some grand category, bullying. Well, what specifically did I do that was bullying?
Yeah.
Well, we can't tell you that.
It was a microaggression.
Yeah, right.
Well, we're moving into this area where anonymous actions can have really serious repercussions, and I'm sort of exploring, is it possible? I am fully with you that Google and YouTube and all these things need to be separated. They can't be interconnected, where if you do violate some rule on YouTube, that they've got the ability to take your email. That's got nothing to do with YouTube. That's a punitive measure. But what about the possibility that anonymous groups could be striking people's accounts, as CrowdStrike does, hiding it as someone else doing it? We've got all this deceptive anonymous activity happening. It's another thing that gives me pause about, could someone infiltrate this QAnon, be sending false information?
Oh, the QAnon, first of all, the QAnon identity is tightly protected within the 8chan. So there is one owner of the 8chan who they call Code Monkey. That's the kind of typical name that they have on the internet.
Mr. Code Monkey.
Mr. Code Monkey, and who's in charge of all the way it works. And so you have a trip code, which is your particular identifiers, which come in, and the trip code is identified as well by which devices, which IP devices you're communicating on. So security on that can be set to be kind of like a 4-level, 5-level security, where it's pretty clear to Code Monkey whether or not this is a legitimate communication or not, or a questionable one. And when the massive attack did occur, which did occur, the solution was to create a board in the 8chan where only QAnon can post. No one else can post on that. And so that's, again, another control that kind of lends an element of credibility to the postings. There's so many different validations from the world of intelligence. I mean, there are, Trump will say something and Q will say something, and the coordination, in the timestamps, in the nature of the communication. I mean, QAnon's referred to 3 of my books by their title. And that's one of the things that first got my attention, was I was realizing that he was using my titles from my books. And that brought me into it. And I got asked to do it at a very high level. People who said, we want you to pay attention to this.
Someone in the White House asked you to do that.
Well,
right?
I'm not going to get into who did it particularly, but I mean, this was a very high level communication that I should get involved in.
Not through Gmail, I hope.
Well, it was, not through Gmail, but I mean, the point is, I've had this background and I've done all the writing I've done, and I'm able to begin to understand how to decode and the ability to validate and then to explain to a larger audience how it works, so that a larger, now I'd say there's 20 or 30 million people
Aware of Q.
aware of Q and following on boards like, at CBTS_stream, which is the calm before the storm _stream. Now, people who get into this, you end up spending an enormous amount of time because they map together. There's time references, date references, words that are used, and themes that are developed. And it's a intricate system, just like high-level intelligence. Very high level. The president gets a briefing every day. The head of the CIA, Pompeo, national security briefing. Well, that briefing, especially for an experienced president, somebody who's done it over time, gets to be very expert. You don't have to explain the 10th time who this splinter group is of this splinter group of this group. You basically have the context in mind, so that the intelligence can be a very high-level discussion that if you weren't party to it, if you hadn't been through this process, would possibly just sound like gibberish.
Right.
But to the president who understands where they're going, in a few sentences, you can be...
It's almost a shorthand.
Almost shorthand, informed of where things are. And then if you want deeper background, it can be provided. But in the intelligence briefing, which may last 45 minutes, you're going to cover the national security threat globally and everything that's being picked up by U.S. intelligence worldwide that you need as president to be aware of, 50% of which may never happen.
Right.
Or more.
And how do you feel about Pompeo making this transition from CIA to State Department and the new CIA director? A lot of people were very concerned about that.
Well, and I understand. First of all, knowing Donald Trump, I've known him over the years, and he's always comfortable with a small group of people that he runs organizations with who are extremely loyal to him and have a close working personal relationship. So Pompeo was the one who gave Trump these daily national security briefings as head of the CIA. And Pompeo is military. He's trained with number one in his West Point class, and has the right discipline to deal with Donald Trump. Trump and Pompeo as people would like each other, whereas Trump and Tillerson are born to clash, because Tillerson, as head of Exxon, feels like he makes the decision. Now he's head of the State Department, so he'll determine foreign policy. But, President Trump said, wait a minute, I'm the president.
Yeah.
It's my foreign policy, and your job is not to determine foreign policy, but to implement what I tell you to do. And then Tillerson goes off and he makes, derisive comments about Donald Trump. And he begins to say, well, this is what we're going to do as a nation. And Donald Trump calls him on the phone and says, I don't know where you got that, but that is not what we're doing. What you think we're doing, but it isn't what we're doing. So these high, and also both Tillerson and Gary Cohn, who left at the same time. First Trump had the people from the Republican National Committee, and Priebus shows up and says, look, we're the pros from Dover. We've been in Washington forever. We know how Congress works. Just rely on us, and we'll get you your Obamacare repealed and replaced.
Trust me.
Trump's is great. I could just kind of coast back and go to Mar-a-Lago and golf, and you guys will take care of business. Well, they don't. It's a disaster. Doesn't work. Well, the day it didn't work, Trump fired Priebus out and got rid of the whole tier of them. So now these guys come in and say, oh, that's okay. Those were just we're the guys from Wall Street. We're Goldman Sachs. We really know how things work. We're the ones who provide the investment structures. We really run the world. And why don't you just leave it to us? And we'll make you successful. So Trump does that. He says, I want to have a massive tax cut, and by the way, we're pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And Gary Cohn says, well, what do you mean? And Trump says, well, we're not going to have multilateral trade treaties, and by the way, we're going to have some new steel tariffs. And Tiller says, what do you mean? And he says, well, I mean, you guys are gone.
See ya.
I don't need Wall Street anymore. I'm bringing back the steel industry. I'm bringing back the coal industry. I'm going to revitalize some of these cities that the Democrats have ruled for 50 years and turned into nightmares. And we're going to bring jobs and families back to them, and we'll see who benefits in the long run. It's Trump's policy. Now Trump is down to the military. And it's one of the points I make in Killing Deep State, and it's a very important point, is that, I was suggesting, writing and getting the word to Trump, that he should not make the same mistake Jack Kennedy made.
Yeah.
And that is after the...
Keep the top on the limo?
Well, no, that's a good one too. But I mean, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy really turned against the military for lying to him, and he had people like Curtis LeMay, holdover from World War II, who wanted to go to nuclear war, was pushing nuclear war, and they also abused Kennedy because they said it was a family of Joe Kennedy and pacifists, and Adlai Stevenson was his representative in the UN, and they didn't trust Adlai Stevenson. He was never been in the military. They considered him an egghead and a wimp. The generals wanted to flex their muscles and go to war. So the advice to Trump was, you better keep the military close. And Trump has realized two things. One is that military intelligence trumps all other forms of intelligence. Because under this Supreme Court decision, Reynolds v. U.S., which was a 50s decision, and involved I believe, a B-26 airplane that went down and mysteriously and was being re-equipped by the military. And the Supreme Court basically decided that nobody had a right to know what was going on, including the other intelligence agencies. So military intelligence trumps the others. And the branch of government that's closest to Trump are the Marines.
Yeah.
Because the president can directly command the Marines and doesn't have to ask anybody's permission to do it. The other branches of government require a little bit more involvement of the Joint Chiefs and involvement of Congress.
Of the military.
Of the military.
I didn't know that.
So the Marines have, going back to Thomas Jefferson, the Barbary Pirates. I mean, who'd he send? He's at the Marines, shores of Tripoli.
And I had a conversation with Field McConnell this morning where he said his sister, Christine Marcy, who was at the top levels of the SES or helped create the SES, that she has basically surrendered to him. And it seemed like another sign of the deep state crumbling.
Trump is going to be very effective on this, and I think uniquely effective. But the point is that executive order that he signed put into place an emergency situation under which he can declare martial. It has been declared. We're under martial law. Well, yes, not fully brought out, but with an emergency declaration.
Wow.
It's already been declared.
That's very...
And by the way, something Trump did that people that got bypassed altogether is within the last month he redefined military tribunals and signed an executive order completely redefining military tribunals, which is done periodically, but this one is done in a way that's going to give him the ability to bring forward political criminals who have committed treason.
Do them all in Chappaqua?
Or Gitmo.
Gitmo, yeah. Good thing we kept that open.
And are refurbishing it.
I wouldn't refurbish it.
Well, Hillary's going to need air conditioning and everything.
But it's an interesting point. So Trump's first foreign trip to Saudi Arabia. And now today we have the Crown Prince is meeting with Donald Trump, I think, as we speak.
Wow.
They have had the benefit of many months of interrogations of extremely powerful people, including Prince Walid, who some people say was strung up upside down and beaten and has negotiated a way out of there. Do you agree with me that it's likely that a lot of the information that has come out of those interrogations is coming right back to Washington, to Trump, exposing Americans, possibly including Brennan, who have been corruptly gaining benefits out of deals in Saudi Arabia, construction and otherwise?
Probably deeper than you realize, because Vernon Jarrett, who was, one of the, I guess the father-in-law of Valerie Jarrett, part of that whole family, in 1979 wrote an editorial that I discussed in the birth certificate book, where Vernon Jordan said that al-Mansur, who was a militant Black Panther turned Black Muslim, working with al-Walid, Saudi Arabia, had money available for African American kids going through school who they thought might someday be president. Okay, and then when it came time for Obama to get into Harvard Law School, al-Mansur called Percy Sutton, very famous lawyer in Harlem, and says, I'd like you to recommend this kid to Harvard named Barack Obama. Now, we don't know very much about Barack Obama's background, but I'm suspecting from these connections, and I said, you'll be shocked in this book how much the connections between Soros and, killing the deep state, how much between Soros and the Jarretts and the al-Walids and the Bushes go back in this deep state connection.
Yeah.
So we may find out where Obama got financed for college. The al-Walid may just have given up.
Yeah.
And, part of this whole move was a decision by Donald Trump that he needed to realign forces in the Middle East. And part of that was to convince Saudi Arabia that if they did not do something about the Wahhabis were going to begin turning on the royal family. So take your pick.
So do you think that was what was going on when Pompeo gave the CIA medal to the previous crown prince, and then we got Mohammed bin Salman taking over as crown prince?
I think that was all orchestrated around this idea that the family was going to transition to the new leadership. They were going to bring in all of these princes who are all now part of the New World Order, running around with the Clintons and the Obamas and,
financing 9/11.
all the wonderful things that they did with their money in the EU and everywhere else, and take their money away from them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Zucker, whatever his name is, and Eric Schmidt, without their billions of dollars, are just two broke guys. And the same holds for the entire Saudi royalty.
You could hang them all upside down.
Well, on that also, there's news that in the last little while here, Prince Bandar reputedly killed himself.
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and that's shocking
Wow.
to me, because in most organized religions, including Islam, suicide is not something that you're supposed to do.
I'm shocked.
And
But see, again, you've got the dynamic that if he was implicated, this may have been the best way out.
Wow.
In other words, it was going to be, if his connections to the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation and all of the illegal money laundering to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars that went on. Because remember, the Clintons were not only dealing with, with the criminals in India, including the Guptas and McKinsey, who went to prison.
Yeah.
They were dealing with the criminals in Haiti, who were running Digicells and all kinds of other operations in Haiti, and the criminals in Canada who were trying to put together the takeover of the uranium in order to sell it to Russia,
Right.
who wanted to take it over. They were just going to get it arranged for Russia so Russia could come in and buy it. Clintons orchestrated that. I mean, and the criminals in France with Unitaid,
Oh, France.
criminals in Geneva with the UN. I mean, if there was a criminal anywhere in the world that wanted to up their ante and their visibility, you spelled that Clinton Foundation.
Friends of Bill.
I have to shamelessly promote the only law that I've come up with, Ortel's first and only law. You just take anyone connected to the Clintons, put it into Google with the word fraud, and you will definitely laugh. But on a serious note, we just learned this morning that Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president of France, has indeed been arrested, and in a game changer for me, because I think this is going to bring together, once it gets fully exposed, not simply the Clinton Foundation fraud, but also Benghazi. And also the degree to which American former presidents like the Clintons and aspiring presidents have been setting up world leaders with their own foundations to arrange for government monies to go into these foundations and then get kicked back to finance lifestyles going forward. This is all coming together. I mean, in France or in anywhere, any serious nation, when a given leader arrests the leader of previous leader, that's got to be front page news.
Well, and the other other part of this you have to realize you do is that a big part of Libya with this whole Samantha Powers, we have to protect those who are vulnerable. We got to go in and protect.
Responsibility to protect. Yeah.
The responsibility to protect nonsense was the cover for the fact that largely the French and the Clintons coveted the wealth in Libya, including the oil
and gold
and all the other resources that Gaddafi had a hold of. And so a destabilizing war, was another facet of criminal activity for the Clinton Foundation. And by the way, who shows up in the middle of it but Sid Blumenthal?
Yeah.
Texting in Sid Blumenthal, who, originated the birth certificate issue. Said almost every one of these, nefarious things you can go find either Sid Blumenthal to originate it or David Brock to cover it up with Media Matters, and accuse everybody of being a conspiracy case if they dare to expose or investigate any of this. Now, all this, by the way, is off the grid, and if you mention any of this on Facebook or Google, or now immediately you're targeted and you're about to be unplugged, which is why this whole censorship issue, the Internet Bill of Rights, is so critical, because we can't have the future network of information integration or broadcasting be controlled by a small group of people who are on the inside of this cabal that is determined New World Order to have an intolerant freedom for themselves to enslave everybody else.
And isn't this an area, it's actually, people keep talking about the need for bipartisanship, but in my experience on the Clinton Foundation, I spend more time, now a lot of time with Jason, thank you for that, by the way, but a tremendous amount of time on progressive radio, progressive stations. Isn't killing the deep state a program that the left, certain element, the true left,
the true left, see,
they should be in favor of it.
The true left is hardly, there's not much of it left anymore. Now, it may be reclaimed again, but if you look at the left that was when John Kennedy was alive or Hubert Humphrey was alive, that type of left doesn't exist. This left is moved hard. This is a hate left.
Right.
This is really hate. This is the Southern Poverty Law Center. This is the first origins of a European-style socialist or communist party. The first people they kill, by the way, are the useful idiots, which is, all of the groups that have gone out and protested for them, not realizing that they were basically dispensable as soon as power was seized, which has typically been the case in if you take a look at all the revolutions of the left, including National Socialism, which was Nazis. They were, a lot of this originates in the conflict between National Socialists on the left and the Communists on the left in the Weimar Republic, and I write a lot about that. The point is, today, with Donald Trump, he's saying in the Middle East, we need a new, as it were, balance of power. And we're going to have Saudi Arabia combine with Egypt and Jordan and the United States to form a countervailing balance against the Iranians, who have combined with Russia and with Syria, and also into Lebanon with Hezbollah, and the Muslim Brotherhood is core to that fact. Even though the Muslim Brotherhood are Sunni and the Iranians are Shiite, they combine in their hatred of the United States and of Israel. But the fundamental, even if Israel were to be eliminated, if the United States were to be eliminated, the final battle would be Sunni Shiite, because that's the real core division that is in the heart of the heart of Islam.
Doctor, have you seen any evidence that you feel links the activities in Las Vegas on October 1st to all this turmoil in Saudi Arabia?
It certainly looks like an extraction. The prince was extracted and brought back, and that was step one of what turned out to be this essentially revolution or coup from the top.
Because there was an attack in Jeddah 6 days later.
I think it was tied together, and I've seen some of the photographs of it, and it's not something I've written about or really gone much on the record on, but if pressed on it, I would suspect that it was an extraction, and the shooting was a false flag or a cover, because the pieces don't fit together. The evidence we've been told doesn't fit together. Now, before we get distracted in that sidebar, I want to continue on the main theme here.
Sure.
Which is that what I'm arguing in Killing the Deep State is, I'm not going to get on the mainstream media. They don't want this message out there.
Well, while you bring that up, Jason, you've got, 51,000 subscribers, loyal subscribers, many of whom stay on these broadcasts for the entire period of time. If you could put that book up again, Jerry. I mean, you need to get out and you need to get this book, and more important than that, one of the beauties of Jason's channel is that his listeners are very engaged. They not only do they listen, they think, they absorb, they act. You need to please bring this book, read it for yourselves, bring it to the attention of your friends, recommend it to your friends, even lend it to your friends. Get this book out there. It's a very, very important book.
Well, buy it as a gift for a friend so that the doctor has more books sold.
Well, it's not about selling books. It's about making sure people get the message out.
Of course.
Because I'm also trying to, raise funds to send some books to people who can't afford them. I'm doing everything I can to get this out there. And the key issue is that this audience, your audience, Jason, I've supported you from virtually the beginning.
You have, Doctor. Thank you for that.
And the audience around the QAnon audience, which is huge and also very dedicated, and I've been working with them for hours and hours and hours, as you have, on their live stream broadcasts, which we've been posting around the internet and on my YouTube channel on CBTS_stream, and there's a very, very large audience that is, as it were, awakening. And I think we're at the beginning of a second American Revolution, which is going to be done as the first one was. The anonymous Thomas Paine writing the Common Sense under the Pamphleteers under an anonymous name, which produced this awareness among the colonies that rule by Great Britain was probably not a good idea. And the original liberalism, which was the Locke and the Hume and Hobbes, those philosophers which were arguing an extension of Aristotelian politics to include more rights as opposed to duties, which was the ancient version, but still limited government. This was a transformation that occurred, waking people up to the need for overthrowing, right then, the despotism they were under from the crown. And at this, right here, there's a second, I think, American Revolution, and the overthrow here is against these forces on the hard left, combined with the intelligence agencies that want a intolerant, tightly controlled from the top down society in which there is no dissent, and those who do dissent are eliminated. And life, as Thomas Hobbes would say, would be increasingly nasty, cold, nasty, hard, brutish, and short. I always wondered if Thomas Hobbes would have minded if it had been nasty, cruel, brutish, and long.
Seems
probably
worse.
would have been okay. That might have been okay with him. But the fact that it was all those things and short was particularly insulting to Hobbes.
I kind of like the idea of that phrase applying to the prison terms that should be meted out to the co-conspirators in this, who are being uncovered now.
So, I mean, I think what the stage is set for, and what, again, a key reason I wrote Killing the Deep State was to let people in on the inside of the thinking of the counterattack that Donald Trump is in the process of launching. Now, I was trained in public relations when I worked my way through college by Edward Bernays, who wrote Propaganda, brilliant creative public relations, and was asked by Goebbels to come and help Nazi Germany. After he wrote, of course, he was Jewish, he refused.
I would hope so.
Goebbels used the work anyway, and
Wow.
I spent a lot of time with, and so this is a propaganda attack launched by the deep state. A lie, which is that Trump was conspiring with Russia over the theft of the Democratic National Party emails. And the lie here has been magnified now to Special Counselor Robert Mueller. And you can't defeat propaganda by the truth. It's ironic, but you can't. So you say, well, there's no evidence there was Russian collusion. And the answer to that is, you haven't looked hard enough. If we keep looking, we'll find it.
How do you defeat propaganda, Doctor?
The only way to defeat propaganda is you have to undermine the credibility of the people advancing the lie. Okay, so
With truth, obviously.
with truth, yes, but with truth of a particular kind, so that you find that the Strozik and Page, and the hatred for Trump, and all their emails released by the Inspector General, and then you find McCabe, who was revising the interrogation report with Strozik and General Flynn, even though Comey said that there had been no lying. Suddenly, after McCabe got finished rewriting the 302 interrogation report, there was the basis for an indictment. Or you find that Loretta Lynch comes back and says, we need this to be called a matter, not a criminal investigation of Hillary. It's emails. And you find that, Comey revised that document any number of times with suggestions from Strozik and McCabe to constantly make it clear there was no criminal involvement. So, okay, so you begin to get this. Then the Fusion GPS was paid for by Hillary in part, and the DNC, and no one validated it. By the way, it was this outrage. And, okay, so Carter Page. Well, Carter Page had, in 2015, participated in a very similar sting against a Russian group for the Department of Justice. Now,
Working for the FBI, right?
is he an undercover agent? And in getting wiretapping or electronic approval on him was his mission to go talk to everybody else so they could be included in the collateral damage.
Right.
Because no one wanted to know what Carter Page said. They want to know what these other people
Right.
said.
Well, I got a question.
And then that information goes into the White House, where Valerie Jarrett unmasks the names with the approval of Barack Obama, and it's leaked to the press. Now, once you get this information, and once you begin to see, the recasting of these people, the reframing of them, and it's clear that they committed these crimes, it's no longer possible to think of the Russian narrative as the same power or impact. Then you point out the 13 Russians that Mueller did indict. The Department of Justice said did not impact the election, and were not involved with Trump or his campaign. That's the only one. Those are the only Russians indicted.
Well, Charles is still upset about Anna Chapin.
Well, that's a serious point, actually. I mean, we have our mutual friend Joe DeGeneva, I guess, is signed up to help Trump.
Which I think is a very good thing.
It's a good thing. And he and his wife, of course, are representing William Campbell, who was involved, supposedly, and has documentary evidence, routing millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation in cash for who knows what in this 2009-10 period. Going back to the June 27th, 2010, I think it was 10 or so Russian spies were rounded up, and instead of being dry cleaned, which I think you would agree is the normal way you do it, they were rushed out of the country on July 7th. Was that 4 months before the 2010 pivotal elections? Why aren't we going back to that time period and saying, what was really going on there with the reset, with Skolkovo? Who was benefiting financially from these investments in Russia and in Silicon Valley?
Well, I read a whole chapter in this book, Killing the Deep State, on Hillary and Podesta selling military technology, including this hypersonic technology to Russia under the reset and the Skolkovo.
They've now implemented that.
And that they've created a new missile we can't shoot down with our current anti-ballistic missile systems. And and got paid. Now, they got paid through the Clinton Foundation, $147 million, including the uranium scam. And they got paid Podesta through Jewel, which is set up, and Panama Papers make very clear as a Russian money laundering operation. And I tracked down the banks through which the money flowed and the Russian, oligarch mobsters that the Podesta brothers were working with. Podesta brothers involved in, the Ukraine, the same kind of issues in which Manafort's been indicted. Tony Podesta closes his firm, doesn't get indicted. Okay, now we go into Mueller, and we realize that Mueller, covered up the Russian bribery scheme so that the Committee on the Foreign Investments in the United States didn't know the Russians were bribing in the U.S. uranium industry when the proposal came forward to sell 100% of Uranium One to Russia. You go into the HSBC, when Mueller's head of the FBI. I helped to break that case, with 1,000 pages that John Cruz, an officer in Long Island, brought showing the money laundering going.
And you were targeted for that, remember?
Oh yes, I was targeted for that.
Sorry to bring it up, but
a little detail. Yeah. I think my income tax reports have been scrutinized so many times that it's kind of like Harvard. Harvard's about just put in stone. Yes, Dr. Corsi does have a PhD here. I'm sure they've asked so many times. The same with income taxes. They've been scrutinized over and over again. This is, again, the political harassment you're going to face in this deep state determination to suppress. The deep state's a little more powerful. They'll just kill you. They're going to bother with all this nonsense. Just make sure you suffer a car accident somewhere. So the point is that if you get to the, this stage with Mueller, and now Mueller, okay, what did Mueller do in Benghazi? Well, here's Susan Rice, and here's Mueller, and it appears now Mueller gave the stand-down order for all the law enforcement in Benghazi.
Mueller did that?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
The Fest, wasn't it? I spoke to Chris Peranto about this. Yeah, the stand-down was a big deal.
Yeah, stand-down is a huge deal. And then you go back into, Mark Rich, and shows up again, Mueller and Rosenstein.
And
Comey. Comey was on the board of HSBC. Comey's brother does the taxes for the Clinton Foundation.
Oh, Lordy.
Well,
as I say, the interconnections.
Right. Well,
by the time you see Mueller this way, now the solution is to get a Department of Justice, after you clean it out, whatever you're going to have to do, but to get a special counselor or an outside counselor outside of Washington, he starts a panel on any one of these issues, Uranium One, and Mueller gets a target letter from a grand jury and an invitation to come speak under subpoena with all of his papers turned over. Now, if Mueller is special counselor and he gets a subpoena letter from a grand jury investigating his complicity under possible criminal charges for the Uranium One cover-up, how's he going to remain special counselor?
He can't, I don't think. So you know Donald Trump personally and have for a long time, and I would not characterize him as, I don't know him at all, but he doesn't strike me as all that patient. Why is Donald Trump taking so long to bring this to a head?
Donald Trump is patient.
Oh, is he? Okay.
He, I mean, first of all, one of the ironies of Donald Trump is that he doesn't need to do any of this. You know, I mean, he really doesn't need to.
You mean to even be president?
He had a perfectly comfortable life. What does he have to subject himself to all this abuse for?
For free.
For free. You know, he's not being paid. Besides,
he's probably losing.
The pay is insignificant. The White House is old and small and used by a lot of people, not nearly as nice as Mar-a-Lago or the Trump Tower with its marble and gold. You have to stay there every day in this little fishbowl. You know, which I'm sure, you know, his wife and the other families looked in here. The Clintons, oh boy, we're here. They jump on the beds. It's really exciting. We got the White House. And Trump is saying,
downgrade. Well, I was like, downgrade.
Saying, bummer.
Dude, I've just downgraded.
Well, the Clintons didn't want to damage the furniture because they planned to steal it.
Donald Trump has one of the best airplanes. He's got the 757 with these supercharged engines, which makes it very fast. He's got an interior that's decked out in all kinds of, you know, elaborate, beautiful. He's got desk. He's got, you know, bedroom. He's got couches. It's all paneled. I mean, this is a plane of which there's only one in the world. And they say, well, Mr. Trump, you can't fly that anymore. You have to use Air Force One.
Downgraded again.
Well, what's Air Force One? Well, the press are here. There's a few press, maybe 75, 80 of them back here. We packed them in the back. Don't worry about it. They're in the back. And I said, well, you know, who else is it? Well, there's the staff. They're sharing the space. I mean, right up here.
Yeah.
So, well, you've got your office here. You know, you got your office. You go in this office. So he goes in there and he looks around and he says, you know, where's the marble? This is not. So Trump has a perspective, I believe, that he wants to get this done, and he understands, look at how much he has accomplished, but he understands that some of these things take some time, because if what I write in Killing the Deep State is so shocking that had I written it a year earlier, no one would have been prepared to accept it at all. Whereas today the ground is laid for it. And there's enough information out there where you can see the conspiracy. Now, it hasn't been brought to justice yet, but it's in the process of being brought to justice. And that may take another full year. It may take another full year and a half. But before we're done, I'm predicting there will be military tribunals and there will be treason charges at the highest levels, meaning both Obama and Hillary.
And the penalty for treason is?
Capital punishment.
AKA death.
Now, whether they'll actually do that or, you know, put them away in the Tower of London for a long time, I'm not sure which they're going to prefer. But the point is, I don't think that they're going to be allowed. Trump is not going to rest until he gets a team in place that is capable of getting justice. Because the point is to kill the deep state, to end this, to make sure that these criminals aren't ensconced in a bureaucracy, that they control as a shadow government, and don't care what you tell them to do as president, because they're going to enforce the tax laws the way they want. They're going to, anybody who they like politically gets a pass in the justice system, Anybody they don't like politically, gets unplugged from Google, unplugged from Facebook,
Email.
Walks the plank.
gets all their income taxes
Yeah.
investigated, and is charged with some or other criminal offense.
So there's been a lot of suspicion here, a lot of activity. Sarah Carter writes in the last, I think, 24 hours or so that she believes McCabe already is singing like a canary, which is surprising to me because the report on Thursday was that he went into that Justice Department meeting threatening Sessions, threatening people. How many people do you think already are singing?
Quite a few. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that they're bringing out Comey's book on top of me publishing this book, and that I'll be denied, ABC. None of the mainstream media will cover it. So those who are not in tune with alternative media, or not watching Jason's programs, or not following QAnon, or not following Alex Jones and InfoWars, are not following the alternative media, aren't going to know about this book. They're going to believe Comey's version of his, victimization and his honor, not realizing how many times Comey lied, how many times he was compromised. Aren't going to question him about the millions of dollars he made on the Lockheed board at a time Lockheed was getting defense contracts from the, Obama administration and contributing millions to the Clinton Foundation. That's not going to be brought up in any Comey interview.
Certainly not.
And so what the American public, I think, are waking up to, and this is why I think, again, this hashtag, Great Awakening, is that Americans are beginning to realize that the mainstream media has just been presenting a kabuki show. It's just you watch the shadows on the wall, use the, Plato analogy, and you're really not seeing anything that has to do with reality. You're just being shown the news that the government, the internal powers, the cabal, the deep state wants you to see. And whether that's, whether it takes the Pentagon Papers or any of the other things we've had to have opened the eyes of the American public to the lies.
WikiLeaks, all that.
WikiLeaks. I mean, you go back through the Church Committee, the Tower Commission. I mean, there's plenty of red pilling opportunities, but I really wanted them to do this book in red. It's a red pilling.
Yeah, there you go.
I do want to take this opportunity to thank you both and also congratulate you. We've shattered every record on Crowdsource the Truth. We've got 3,016 viewers watching right now.
It's great.
Wow. Well, thank you, Jason.
Hey, I couldn't do it without you guys. So certainly the arrest of Sarkozy would seem to send a signal to all of the Andrew McCabes and even Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton.
It's what's going to be tough to watch, and it's going to, my timing of writing this book right now, I wanted The Killing of the Deep State to come out right at the cusp of transition. Trump has survived the first attack. Now it's time for counterattack. Julian Assange published when I believe Julian Assange is now in Switzerland, and I think that Snowden is in China. I think they're in Hong Kong. They're both not. There's been no sightings of Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy since Christmas that I'm aware of. Assange published this very famous chess game. This was a chess game that was between Capablanca and a guy named Marshall, I think in 1917 or 1918. And the nature of that chess game just happens to have a very great kind of analogy for what's going on here. Marshall had been trying to beat Capablanca. Capablanca was Cuban. I think he's probably one of the most brilliant chess players maybe ever. And Marshall really wanted to beat him. He'd not been able to do this. And so Marshall studied, he came up, he was playing black, moved second. and he designed this initial very brilliant attack which the two pawns, king and queen pawns, are advanced to the center of the board in a very unorthodox opening. And Capablanca was taken by surprise. So for the first dozen moves or so, Capablanca is just trying to figure it out and pairing the attack. And at any moment he could have made the wrong move where Marshall would have had checkmate. But Capablanca kept figuring it out. It was that brilliant. So he paired the attack at one point. So it got to the point where it was clear Marshall lost that initiative. Now, when you look at Capablanca's his pieces at this time, he's not only paired the attack, there's two bishops lined up on diagonal attacks right at the king. And he's got the queen on a direct column attack right at the king. And he's got all of his pieces that within a few moves he's got a very powerful attack organized in mid-game. This is now mid-game. At the very end of the game, towards the end of the game, Capablanca has a rook that has been in A1 for the entire game, a sleeping rook, they call it. And so he advances pawns and gets this rook to advance to A6 and gets one of his pawns to be a queen. Now, unless he makes some horrible mistake, I mean, it's inevitable he's going to win, and Marshall resigns pretty soon at this point. But the point is, the attack failed. So Mueller and the deep state thought they had it, but they didn't have enough horsepower to checkmate. Trump survived it.
Covfefe.
Now we're into the counterattack. And the last part of the counterattack, which was Assange was signaling, was that his rook will be released, and I think Snowden too, and they'll be able to deliver the final chapter of this, which is the extent to which the intelligence systems have grown into a monitoring of the U.S. population and are central to the activities of the deep state, combined with social media in the deep state and the deep state criminal actors who have controlled these agencies of government to the advantage of the Clintons and the Obamas.
Yeah, we've all had the privilege of going to great universities. To a certain extent, and to an important extent, the rationing system wherein people get admitted to these universities and are graduated from the universities, and the way thought has been shaped now for 30, 40 years, Orthodox thought, that's got to be part of the deep state too, is it not?
It is, and I mean, this is university system today. I think the best thing to do would be to quit paying student loans, because so many of the student loans have allowed these universities to expand,
right.
Universities to be created that should never have been created, faculties to be on pay that they never would have been able to have, and we've got $1 trillion debt that may never be paid off. Another $1 trillion to be paid off by the Treasury. And I think, where Trump is headed, Trump ultimately wants to attack even a deeper level of the deep state, going back to the 1913 period, attack the Federal. We don't need the Federal Reserve. John Kennedy recognized this, publishing those Treasury certificates that he published. We can eliminate the Federal Reserve, central bankers, all the Woodrow Wilson New World Order stuff. League of Nations originates. He articulates his Princeton University version. You see my Harvard.
I'm down with that. We can attack Princeton.
His Princeton University version of the fundamental freedoms, which he articulates in the middle of some brilliant night's sleep, and he now is informing the world of his genius. Brings him to Versailles, where the great heads of state of Europe look at this guy and say, I think he fell on his head in the bathtub in the morning.
He was bathing with Hillary.
And so that's been, we've been living in a Wilsonian world since, and I think the elimination of income tax, the elimination of the Federal Reserve, the return to a currency that is not a fiat currency or two-tier currency, All these, I think, are ideas that Donald Trump would be happy to embrace, but they've got to be after this fundamental deep state has been deconstructed and people brought to prison for treason. These people don't believe in the Constitution. They don't believe in the United States government. They want to create, they were happy to figure out a way in which Hillary could have been put in the White House even though she didn't win the election. Hillary Clinton lost a rigged election.
That takes talent.
And voter fraud. They had controlled the media.
Yeah.
They lied about Donald Trump.
They continue to.
And she still lost.
Right. Well, now the good news I can report is that in the Clinton Foundation matter, there is an IRS investigation. There are FBI investigations. There are foreign investigations, and they face this deadline, May 15th, 2018. They have to, by then, apply for extension of their tax return, and prior to the next week, they have to respond to some demands from California. They got to start explaining all these states. Do you foresee, as I do, that we could see a lot of activity coming here, gathering momentum?
I think, and again, this is a QAnon reference. You keep saying, boom, boom, boom. We're going to hit these massive developments, and they're happening. Clinton Foundation under investigation in any one part of the world will trigger investigations worldwide, and that's happening. The next phase will be discrediting Mueller and making it clear that Mueller is nothing but a deep state hack who his entire career
Partisan,
Princeton graduate.
we are in.
And he's going to be exposed, and that's going to be the end of the special prosecutor. Now, Trump will come on. I'm very pleased to see Joe DeGenova be advising. Joe DeGenova, I think, is going to undertake the full explanation of how corrupt these people are, because Trump has started to name Mueller and say the conflicts of interest and push for his dismissal. And as I'm saying, the best way to dismiss him is to put him under investigation from within the Justice Department and let him have to do his form of recusal, which is to resign.
That would seem to be a straightforward approach.
Nobody has to fire anybody.
Right. Now, some have said to me, our mutual friend for our lunches, have said to me that there is a possibility that Barack Obama may have given people secret pardons, which we've looked up. You're not allowed to do that, but there's a possibility that he tried it nonetheless. How do you handicap that?
It wouldn't be. It would not be honored because you can't. It's not a legitimate way to give a pardon. If you want to legitimately give a pardon, you're going to have certain procedures to follow. And if he did not follow those procedures, the pardon will not be considered legitimate.
So we needn't worry about that.
I don't think so. I think the next part of this is going to be, I think what we're seeing in Zuckerberg and Facebook is just the beginning.
You mean the Federal Trade Commission investigating?
And also the Congress looking seriously at an Internet Bill of Rights. The examination of FTC, application of antitrust, privacy requirements on social media, the attempt to diversify social media and get instead of having Twitter, having Gab, which is one I've been looking at, and having some structures within the blockchain, that are looked at as alternatives for social media archiving of information. There's alternatives that are going to come on because the era of, Zuckerberg and Schmidt and Dorsey ruling the world is
not happening.
It's not the future.
That's not happening.
And Silicon Valley had better reevaluate its leftist politics in terms of how the country is going to perceive all this. I mean, even within California, I think there's increasing recognition that the Democratic Party with and I make this point again, I read a whole chapter on that in this Deep State book. The Democratic Party moving with Perez, Tom Perez, who is La Raza lawyer, the race, Spanish idea that we stole most of the West from Hispanic entities. This Atzlan, which was this mythical entity that supposedly was this Hispanic nation of the West, and Keith Ellison, who was a black Muslim. Now, so we see the pictures finally of Barack Obama with,
Farrakhan.
And so we knew Barack Obama participated in the 1995 Million Man March, which he lied about. Of course, Barack Obama, it's hard to know what he did not lie about.
Well, and doesn't he also have the initial period after he was graduated from Columbia? Didn't he work for 5 years at a firm that some say is connected to the CIA?
Yes, it was connected to the CIA. And I don't know, I've always maintained that Barack Obama is a CIA creation.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the problem of our politics, is the CIA has dominated, the Bushes.
Sure.
This go back to the pre-World War II when the Bushes and the Harrimans were financing Hitler. I think there's a strong argument that out of World War II we became, Hitler's idea of a social welfare state where the multinational corporations had a strong partnership with government is very hard to find dissimilar than the New World Order kind of crowd's idea of how international governments should be run. Let the multinational corporations set the rules with these multinational corporate structures like the EU, and the rest of us can take our orders from nameless bureaucrats in Brussels.
That sounds appealing.
Nice recipe for freedom, doesn't it sound like a great,
Doctor,
a great
you spoke
idea?
about the elimination of fiat currencies and things like that. I don't know if you've spoken about this that much that I've heard, but do you see cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin as a tool of the deep state or a way to defeat the deep state?
I think cryptocurrencies can be evolved into a alternative that is to fiat currencies that could have specific applications. I think you could develop cryptocurrencies for Social Security, pay it off in cryptocurrency, where if you took your earnings early and held them, you might have a much greater gain if the cryptocurrency value continue to increase in value than cashing it in right away. There are a lot of alternatives, but they have to be they have to be regulated and rooted in something. They
Right.
can't just be, made up and apothecated again, or you're basically dealing with another form of fiat currency. And they are especially prone to scams in early years, which is right now. So I'd say they're yet experimental and yet early stage. Blockchain's a much more powerful idea. Blockchain may be the future of organization for a lot of entities. It may be the future of information organization. And it has a lot more protections for privacy, protections for security. But again, it needs to be advanced. It's at an early stage, blockchain.
And it needs to be regulated, of course.
Both of these will need to be regulated.
I mean, blockchain is computer software. A malicious individual that uses computer software to do something malicious is the person that needs to be subject to regulation.
Well, that's always the case. And of course, in blockchain, you don't want to lose your ID number.
Or in the case of what you were describing with blockchain-driven social media platforms, again, they're resistant to the type of censorship where
Yes.
YouTube can just cut you off, but it also introduces a problem of indelible per se libel, where anyone can post something there, even if it's false and damaging, and it can't be removed.
It's early stage, but the logic is very promising, much more promising than top-down logic, which is what we're using in most of our organizations and structures today. It's more of a decentralized, and I think the future merits examination of decentralized structures, especially after we've gone through the 20th century, the 21st century. We're beginning to understand how these centralized structures result in totalitarianism and gravitate towards state control, and produce state-dominated, state-controlled wars backed by state, propagated news to justify the wars.
Right.
And it was certainly starting with, again, Woodrow Wilson and the entire committee that was created to sell the war to the American people. These become very powerful tools. It's like spending the time with Bernays. I would ask him, if he felt that he, any grief or remorse that he had introduced some of these powerful ideas that were leading to things he obviously found abhorrent, like, the Holocaust, and to mention one, and as well as state control and all the other, issues of what we call today fake news. And his response was basically that these were fundamental, principles that derive from human psychology. And of course, Sigmund Freud was a family member, and he derived much of his thinking from Sigmund Freud to understand these subconscious forces that determine how we perceive news, how we perceive organizations, how we're impacted by advertising. And his basic, what I derived from him was learning the techniques like I'm applying and killing the deep state. I mean, to really show you how you can use these techniques that he understood to combat the abuses of propaganda, which are the deconstructing the examination of Mueller and all these people, where you realize that, once you see that they're criminal, it's hard to buy their lie.
Right.
Once you see the criminal nature of Hitler, it's impossible to go back into 1933 and imagine that this is going to be the industrial future of Europe. But the lie was very seductive in the early phases. And so the New World Order lie, the international trade lie and the World Bank lie and the United Nations lie and this whole
NAFTA
lie, all these things were very seductive when first presented. But then when you deconstruct them to know the criminality of the people proposing them and what they intended that they really do in terms of their own wealth creation to the detriment of everybody else, and the control features that they had in mind, which are what we're gaining today. We're going to have what killing the deep state is all about is we are, and with Donald Trump, I think we have to say we're blessed by God to have Donald Trump there, because he'll deal with these. But we have information technologies, collection technologies, which have been unimagined in previous generations, where we could record permanently everything said on the planet, regardless of how insignificant. We have the ability to reduce all books, all knowledge to few computer disks. It can be searchable. The techniques of control psychologically, etc., and politically, sociologically, are much more understood. The drugs are much more powerful, much more seductive. And the people are not being educated on the fundamental principles of government or the fundamental values or the morals that were fundamental to the ancients, to Aristotle, etc., and were core to Western civilization until modern times.
Not even educated in critical thinking.
Don't even know what critical thinking is. Better take a logic course.
White privilege.
Take a logic course, or engage in really understanding fundamental mathematics or any of these things. And why do that when you can do women's studies and Chicano studies and black studies and socialist studies and all these wave the banners and point fingers at people that you don't like and say they're hurting your feelings.
Well, Jason, I don't know. We've kept Dr. Corsi here for almost
2
hours, and I know you've got travel plans.
Got to travel today.
But
yes.
it is important to get this book out there, to get people to understand how important these themes are and these ideas are that Jerry has laying out in the book. We thank you for giving us this opportunity to share your knowledge, intense knowledge with us and with the crowd. I don't know, Jason, do you have anything to?
Well, it's always a pleasure to see you, Doctor. I think this was a great conversation, and there's so much more to discuss.
Well, it's always, I mean, Charles and I have worked together for a long time now, for years. This goes back more than 10 years now. And we've started to work together as you come on the scene, and I've encouraged Jason, your work. I think you're doing excellent work, and the two of you are producing really important videos that I think people are watching and really learning from. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to have the discussion with you and to address an audience that is largely your audience that you've created. And I'm very appreciative. It's also enjoyable to have a conversation with both of you. It's, you forget, it doesn't feel like 2 hours have passed.
No, not at all.
Well, thank you very much.
Very educational for me, Doctor. Thank you for the kind words. I want to remind everyone watching that they should pick up a copy of Killing the Deep State, and they can see you on InfoWars, where you're...
Yes, in InfoWars will also be selling the book. The book is published by Newsmax. Humanics, the publisher, is owned by Newsmax. And it's available everywhere now. It's in the bookstores, and it should be prominently displayed in the bookstores.
Good.
Of course, unless the bookstore is run by
The
someone
Deep
who
State.
puts my book just behind the mouse. And it's available on BarnesandNoble.com and BooksAMillion.com, as well as on Amazon.com.
But if people would prefer to buy from a retailer that's not controlled by the CIA, they can go to Barnes & Noble, they can go to...
And all of these, I think, I'm appreciative of all the people marketing the book, and those, I think, buying and reading the book are going to find that while Killing the Deep State is shocking, that as they think through it, they're going to realize that it's important to support Donald Trump in this counterattack, because what's at stake is whether or not the Constitution survives, whether or not the constitutional republic that our founding fathers envisioned survives. And this includes fundamental freedoms, including First Amendment, freedom of speech and religion, Second Amendment, right to bear arms, Fourth Amendment, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. And unreasonable searches and seizures in the electronic era are incredibly intrusive.
Indeed.
So it's a great opportunity to tell the story, and this remains a fight to save Donald Trump, President Trump, which is the subtitle. And I encourage people to get involved, because Trump will need the knowledgeable support of the millions who voted for him, staying with him through this battle. This is not going to be an easy battle. Like they say, when we clear the swamp, the alligators are going to bite back. It's not going to be an easy win.
So what are the best places to follow you? Obviously, Twitter,
Do a lot on Twitter, and all the social media I do is one form or another of my name. Like Twitter is Jerome.Corsi, I think. Skype is Jerome_Corsi. I'm writing almost every day in Infowars.com, and I'm working very strongly with Alex Jones to be on Infowars and to support their programs and to contribute news content to them. And it's really the only place I'm publishing is on Infowars.com. There, and with Twitter and with Facebook, posting some content. But I would encourage people to follow Infowars. And then I'm doing some of the decoding with the CBTS_stream. I'm posting various videos increasingly on my YouTube and Gab channel, both, again, my name, Jerome Corsi. And I'm trying to get a little more proficient in being able to produce videos. It takes some time. I'm not nearly at Jason's level.
Very few people are.
But I hope to be able to produce at least passable videos that are watchable.
Well, I'm happy to help you in any way I can, Doctor.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So thank you, gentlemen. It's been a great afternoon, and I'm delighted to have spent the time with you both.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr. Corsi. Wonderful to see you as always. Good luck killing the deep state.
Thank you, pleasure. Thank you,
I
gentlemen.
want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow.